Let's start right away because they're very strict on time here, so we need to finish on time. Thank you to all of you for coming. It's truly, we all think it's a very important discussion to have. And I'm personally very excited because this is going to be interesting for me. And this always happens to my microphone at any event. I have the privilege of being here with two of the most distinguished Ukrainian editors and journalists whose work I admired for years before I actually got to meet them. And now I get to have them on the stage with me and ask questions. So I'm really excited, and I hope you are too. The topic that we're going to be talking about is actually pretty grim, though. But we do believe that it's very important to have a holistic understanding of what is happening in Ukraine that includes threats to the freedom of speech. Let me quickly introduce the panelists here. We have Sevgil Musaeva, editor-in-chief of Ukrainska Pravda. Ukrainska Pravda is, I guess, the biggest website in Ukraine right now. Are you guys the biggest?
This is the biggest newspaper.
Yeah, they are providing crucial daily news and analysis to millions of Ukrainians every day. And next to me, I have Natalie Sedlecka. Natalie is the chief of the Kyiv Bureau of Radio for Europe, but she's mostly, I guess, known in Ukraine for her work as the founder and for many years the head of the investigative journalism team called Schemes. So both of their outlets are behind some of the most earth-shaking investigative stories that Ukraine has seen in many years. And it's really a privilege to be with them on one stage. And I'll be moderating this discussion. My name is Olga Rudenko. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Kyiv Independent. It's an English language outlet in Ukraine. And let's start right away. Just to make it very clear, the challenges to Ukrainian journalism that we're going to be talking about here are mostly not physical threats. They are threats that don't come from Russian missiles or attacks. But before we dive into that, it would be right to acknowledge that in 2 years of the full-scale war, 76 journalists were killed in Ukraine. Out of them, 10 were killed while reporting. It's one of the deadliest wars for journalism. So we're going to structure it the way that we're going to set the context. We're going to explain to you how the evolution was happening for the freedom of speech and for Ukrainian journalism in the past 2 years. So it's very important, I think, to understand the challenges that we're going to be talking about later on. It's very important to first explain what happened to Ukrainian journalism in the very beginning. And when I talk about this, I usually describe it as we went into a survival mode. For the first few months, journalism in Ukraine was something very much not like what it usually is. For the first few months, there were no investigations of corruption that is so normal for us. There were no critical stories about authorities. You can say that journalism was not performing its watchdog function in the first few months. And it happened just so naturally. Like we never, in all of our newsrooms, this was happening, but we never had an agreement. We never got together. There was never a conversation like, let's put the most crucial function of journalism of holding the power to account. Let's put it on hold and then focus on the war right now. Can you very briefly say how it happened in your newsroom? Like, what was it like in those first few weeks and few months? What was not normal there? Like, how it was happening? Who wants to go first?
Okay, maybe I will start. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for coming on Saturday evening to this panel and to share this time with us. Just to explain what is Ukrainska Pravda in Ukraine, this is not the only one of the most popular online media. Also, Ukrainska Pravda played a significant role and very special role in democratic transition of our country. I mean, in 2004, in 2013, and 2014, and it became a kind of a start page for many, many colleagues, many civil activists, politicians, etc. So in the morning of 24th of February, I had the clear understanding that from our work depended a lot of things and a lot of decision making in the country. With the first missiles in Ukraine, we started to work like 24/7, and it was almost about news, because the full invasion started in different places, I mean, in different regions of Ukraine. Of course, we didn't have reporters in all these regions, and at the same time, you have to tell the stories from these territories, what is going on in Kherson, what is going on in Kharkiv, and what is going on in the border with Russia and in occupied territories too. So that's why before Ukrainska Pravda was mostly focused on investigations, you're absolutely right, and political agenda, but with the start of the war, 90% of our time, like 99% of our time, we dedicated to the news. And all team members were involved in producing of news, because it was important to understand what is going on.
Did you guys like get together at any point and decide like, this is what we're going to do now? Or was it just natural?
It just happened. You had no chance to think about politics, about investigation, about satire, because you just need to tell the story, what is going on, and what is going on in Kyiv, what is going on with the army, with different, kind of in different cities. Yes, yeah, I will say that.
Natalie, your team was focused on investigating corruption. It's famous for some of the most important corruption investigations. And then, you know, the full-scale invasion happens, and corruption is not so much an issue in the first months. Why?
I clearly and vividly remember that moment when we came together with our team on 24th of February 2022, and it was clearly what is important and what is not relevant anymore. You're right, prior to full-scale invasion, we were investigating corruption, oligarchy. We were making sure for 10 years before full-scale invasion that Ukraine does not turn off from a democratic path. But, you know, when there is a physical threat, when missiles were falling from the sky and the anti-missile system was not developed at that first few months, at least when the Russian army was advancing Ukrainian cities, when it was occupying the whole regions, the issue of controlling the local power naturally took a back seat. So we started to think how our investigative knowledges and tools can help right here and right now. And we decided within our investigative unit that we will do both news, but also we will do like deep digging into what's going on. For example, on the screen we see the mass graves in Mariupol. Mariupol is under occupation since the first months of Russian full-scale invasion, and it was impossible to go there, but with these investigative tools like satellite imagery, it was possible to at least find out what's going on. We also were, when sanctions were enforced in Europe, we also were using our investigative knowledge as how to track assets around Europe, and found a lot of Russian oligarchs' assets and villas and apartments to make it possible to be confiscated in the interest of Ukraine. And we also started to go to the occupied regions to investigate alleged Russian war crimes, tortures and killing of civilians, and many of those materials laid in the base of official investigations. And unfortunately, even one investigation we had to do about a death of our own colleague, Vera Giric, a Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty producer, who was killed in Kiev in a missile strike, and we found out who exactly from Russian army was responsible for hitting the missile in the residential building. So answering your question, I think there's also another factor, the trust in power, the trust in government that was very high at that moment. It was a special moments like never before, probably in the history of independent Ukraine, when the interest of people, the interest of state, and the interest of government was equal. It was the same.
There was a unique moment when it was kind of like, it felt like we were all in the same boat with them. It was never happened before, I guess, and probably will never happen again. But let's move on to talk about what happened next, because I think it's so fascinating, because after the first few months, when we were in this sort of a freeze, the journalism just bounced back. And I think for every publication, there was that one story that was like breaking this barrier. And the one story that was having a critical look at authorities, an investigation of something, the stories that snapped us out of the state, where we probably had some very difficult decisions to make. And I know that the first such story probably came in Ukrainskaya Pravda in June 2022. Sergey, can you briefly tell us what it was?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right. When we have this existential threat, we were thinking about only how to provide information to our people and actually how to make Russia accountable. So war crimes were in the first place also, and sanctioning Russians' assets, for example, we were searching and investigating all Russian assets, and actually some of them were successfully sanctioned after our publication, which is, I think, a big impact from us. But then we understood that first we understood that corruption didn't disappear, and then we understood that actually the case I want to share and the case I want to tell, this is a case connected to war crimes and our former ombudsman Lyudmila Denisova. The case was that after the liberation of Kyiv region, she started to spread information about sexual violence among Ukrainian women and how Russian soldiers committed these crimes with all detailized and actually very sensitive information. So how women were raped by spoon, etc. How many women, for example, were raped in Bucha, etc. And for some reason, I acknowledged that something wrong with this, because I faced with Lyudmila Denisova before, and she lied about one case before the war. And I started to find answers what actually is happening with these cases she reported on. She was fired, by the way, without any explanation what happened. And we decided to understand what happened at that time. And then I had some calls with prosecutors, and they told me this is something strange because we asked her to provide information about these cases and she avoided to give us any information. Then some of international journalists, foreign reporters, started to find, of course, because they wanted to report about these stories, about these raped women, for example, in Bucha, and they didn't find nothing, and nobody helped them to provide. We understood that something wrong here, and then we found out that she invented some of these cases. From hotline, we had statistics from the hotline they provided to all victims of sexual violence. They received only 90 calls, but at the same time she reported about 1,000 calls. And this is not a story about providing false information and fake information, but also about corruption, because her daughter was involved in the process of providing this psychological assistance, and she received more money from donors, which is, of course, we decided to publish the story, and
let me interrupt you there, because before you go into what happened after the story, so just to let this sink, there is a top Ukrainian official who daily is talking about sexual violence of Russian soldiers against Ukraine. It is republished everywhere. It's in all the headlines. Everybody trusts it because it's an official. And it's, in that moment, you probably think it's helping Ukraine because it's making the world hate Russian soldiers so much and sympathize with Ukraine. So it's, it's Ukrainian propaganda in a way. And you learn that she's fabricating some of the cases. Not all of them, but some of the cases.
Not all of them, and I have to make a clear statement that not all of them were invented by Lyudmila Denisova. But of course it was very responsible and challenging for me, and we discussed a lot this topic inside our team. And then we found out that, so in our label, in the name of Ukrainskaya Pravda, the name truth is very valuable and important, and this is something that we have in our DNA. And this is something we paid a huge price, and the truth helps Ukraine win this war, actually. I'm 100% sure that we can win only with providing true information about what's going on with our country. So, and for us it was important just to tell the truth and to protect the truth. The most important thing and the most important was to protect the truth. And I think here we protected the truth. We told that please don't invent any stories, and it actually helped to change the situation in the future, first of all, because we have to be responsible that tomorrow Ukraine will be, for example, presenting cases International Criminal Court. And if some of them will be fake, of course, it will not help Ukraine to win this war, and to actually Russia pays for what she commits in Ukraine.
But in that moment, though, you're effectively making a decision to undermine Ukrainian propaganda during the war for the sake of the truth. This may sound like a cheesy question, but I actually wonder, were you afraid when you made the decision?
I actually didn't expect such reaction, because reaction was very emotional from readers, from everyone, and actually I received, and the author of this publication received a lot of threats. Some of them were anonymous, some of them were not anonymous, so, and actually...
Those were threats to her life, yeah?
Yes, yeah. They promised us to cut our throats, etc. So we decided to evacuate, for example, investigative reporter for a few weeks, just for safety reasons, and then, but back then I absolutely 100% sure that it was an important story for all Ukrainian journalism and Ukrainian officials as well, that if you lie, Ukrainian journalists will definitely write about it and publish the story about it.
Natalie, what was the story that snapped your newsroom out of the state? What was the first investigation or the first critical story that you produced since the start of the full-scale invasion?
I think there was a moment when society felt that this unwritten contract that everything in a country is for the sake of a victory has been violated by one side, by the government side. And unfortunately, many in power misunderstood this consolidation, taking it as a cover as a license for permissiveness for wrongdoings and for disorder. So when the monopoly of the information started to be used as a cover for hiding real issues that were harming our chances of victory, I think that was a moment when independent reporters decided that it is really our role to protect the truth. So one of the very first anti-corruption cases that was brought in Ukraine was done by our reporters together with our colleagues from Ukrainska Pravda, and it was about embezzlement of funds on road construction. So what we found out is that there is a region in Ukraine called Dnipropetrovsk region. The roads in this region was not that affected by the war as other regions, but at the same time, the biggest amount of money were allocated to reconstruction of the roads in this one Dnipropetrovsk region. It was like billions of hryvnias, and we found out that almost all of this money went to one single company, which was registered under the name of a girlfriend of the head of this region. And she's a fitness instructor, had nothing to do with road reconstruction, and it was obvious case of...
It's a pretty unsophisticated case. Like, Ukrainian corruption, can do better. I think it was because they thought that the war is going on, nobody's going to pay attention, so they went to something so simple and obvious like that.
Exactly. And so we found out that they are traveling together abroad by one, taking the same plane. So it was kind of easy investigation to do. And I agree that it became possible because I think that the Ukrainian government started to feel that no one is looking inside. Actually, due to martial law, many of public funds spending became secret. It was, hidden from official websites. So Ukrainian journalists started to demand to change this, and civil society organizations, NGOs also started to ask for changes, and it was partially changed. So as a result of this specific investigation, what happened next? On one hand, We have a strong anti-corruption system in Ukraine. So the National Anti-Corruption Bureau opened a criminal case. On the other hand, unfortunately, it took already almost 2 months for President Zelensky to fire this guy. So it was a long pause, I think.
I think it's really interesting, and it was I think the same story, like the same investigation in different forms, was done by both of your outlets.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, and I want to add something important, because inside our team we had a big discussion, publish or not to publish, for example, the first investigative reporting, and it was actually good that we made it in cooperation, not a cooperation, but at the same time with Radio Liberty, because it was kind of a tipping point when journalists already crossed these kind of red lines that existed before. And when we had this discussion, Mikhail Tkach, who was the head of Department of Investigative Reporting, said, I think that the prominent quote, I want to mention that it will be very unfair that after the end of this war, a population and our soldiers among Ukrainian army, of course, we have our colleagues and friends, will acknowledge that when they took part in this battle for our country to exist, for the right of our country to exist, still we had these misconducts, corruption, etc. It will be very unfair, and it will be even more unfair that we didn't tell the truth for the people. And yeah, it was clear that we have to do something to change. To continue the democratic transition that actually started in 2004 and continued in 2014.
Thank you. I think it's a great way to set the context for this, but we used a bit too much time for this. But so what happened? This is a brief list of what Ukrainian journalists have discovered in the 2 years since the start of the full-scale invasion. Some of the cases were already mentioned by Sevgeny and Natalie. And now that we illustrated how journalism snapped back into its natural state, into its healthy state, the next step, of course, obviously and naturally, comes that the Ukrainian government, some people in the Ukrainian government, not all of them, but some, begin to see journalism as a threat. And this is happening at the time when the country is going through a war and there's martial law, and it gives them more tools than ever to put pressure on journalists, because there's a lot of things that you can, where you can use the martial law as a cover-up to do something. And this is something that has been happening. And I just wanted to ask you both, very briefly if you can, because we still have some other cases to go through, to list what have been the most prominent examples of pressure that your newsrooms have faced. And who wants to start?
I will say maybe black PR and campaign of discreditation of some of our journalists, and also kind of economic pressure as well, because, for example, some authorities can ask not to provide advertising to Ukrainska Pravda. It is what is happening right now. Yeah, and also we saw some interruption to our gadgets and in our online activities as well. But actually, I think because journalism matters in Ukraine, you can fight back, and actually maybe later we will share some stories how we fight back this.
But in terms of time, was there a specific moment when you think it started, when pressure started? Because we defined the point in time when journalism bounced back to holding people in power accountable in Ukraine. When did the government follow?
I think the tipping point for the journalism in Ukraine was February 2023, this big investigation about procurement in the army. And it left to some resignments of different people. A lot of people were fired after this decision of president. And Reznichenko, actually, he wasn't fired after the investigation, but he was fired. He was fired just a few months after, when a lot of other investigations appeared, and it actually helped to change something. Then the authorities understood that journalism matters and journalism can change something.
So it started when they started to feel that journalists are kind of forcing their hand to do certain things, for example, to fire these officials. Natalie, what about your newsroom?
Yeah, I agree that it started to be like it was probably before the full-scale invasion, when journalists were really like a big force inside the country, and Ukraine is still a fragile democracy. So on one hand, journalism can influence politics and decision-making in the country, and on the other hand, the institutions and people in power sometimes, misuse what they can do. For example, we had one case when our reporter found out that few influential Ukrainian judges have Russian citizenship, which is not only illegal due to Ukrainian law to have dual citizenship if you are a judge, but it's also a question to national security because we're in war with Russia. So why Russian citizen is making justice in Ukraine.
And they were top-level judges, right?
And they opened a criminal case against our journalist for the article interfering with judicial system of Ukraine. Hopefully, luckily, the criminal case was closed fast, and I think it was because there is a big solidarity within Ukrainian journalists who stood, who wrote about it, who criticized such step. And so the government, changed their mind.
In that case, it was closed after you learned about it, right? So he wasn't charged officially, so you were tipped off that the case exists, right? How did you learn about the criminal case?
How do we know that
there is a criminal case? How did you learn about it?
I think there was a letter sent to our editorial office saying that we need to provide information for this case, what our journalist work is, what he's doing, what his position, why he was doing it. So it was already like
that was actually lucky that this happened because it's possible to open a criminal investigation and until the person is charged to not let them know that they are at the center of investigation, and it opens all sorts of opportunities for law enforcement to tap the phones, to surveil, and so on and so on. So it's something that has been used against journalists.
Yeah, we also had this case when our telephones was trying to be hacked with a very sensitive thing. The SMS was intercepted, and SMS is something that is not that accessible to hackers. It's accessible to law enforcement and to mobile operators and law enforcement in Ukraine. So it was also a signal. Mm-hmm.
So there are many things that we can describe, but we thought that it would be very important to highlight a couple of recent cases of pressure on journalists in Ukraine that happened to our colleagues who are not here with us today, but who do amazing work, very important investigative work. And there was, if you ask anybody about the situation with the freedom of speech in Ukraine right now, the one case that everybody's going to remember because it was an enormous scandal in Ukraine a couple months ago is the case of an investigative journalism outlet called Beusen. So I'm going to briefly describe what is happening here, and you can feel free to chip in if you know more details here. So Beusen is an investigative outlet that focuses on government corruption, including top-level corruption. And at some time before the New Year's, in the last days of December, they had an event in a workshop or something in a hotel near Kyiv, and they rented out several rooms where they placed their journalists for the night after the event. And what happened was a couple of weeks later, footage appeared online from inside those hotel rooms that shows their private life in those rooms, shows them having sort of a party there, and there was some headline was slapped on the video that sought to undermine their work, because they're partying, because the headline said something like, here's how they invented their investigations, look at them. So the footage was filmed with a hidden camera inside hotel rooms of journalists. Even in an environment like Ukraine, this is something unprecedented. And it was shocking. I don't know about you guys, but I remember the moment when we learned about this in the newsroom. This was scary. I immediately thought this is something that can happen to anyone. This is just crossing the line. And this is what you see on this bottom photo. This is journalists inside a hotel room having a private party after a work-related workshop. And nobody was ever supposed to see that, including us. But it was published online. So, because they're good journalists, they investigated who was behind that. And the top photo is from the investigation. The people that you see in the photo are heading to the hotel before journalists moved in to install hidden cameras in all the rooms of that hotel. And because they're good journalists, they were able to identify these people. And they were able to identify that they are employees of the security service of Ukraine. The security service of Ukraine is one of the most important law enforcement bodies, especially in a time like war. And they proved that 30 employees of the security service of Ukraine during war were deployed to do this special operation, to install hidden cameras in hotel rooms, to provide this footage of journalists and to publish it online. The QR code leads to a story on the Kyiv Independent's website that describes the case further. But I just wanted to show you, we wanted to show you a little video, and I hope it plays. We don't need the sound for this, it's just a 20-second video. But I need some help from the technicians. Okay, so what you see here is the founder of this investigative outlet who came back to the hotel after the footage was published, and he identified from where the video was shot. And he is taking down this thing that, I don't know what it is, because his theory is that the camera was behind it. And here it is. They prove it. So 30 employees of one of the most important law enforcement agencies in Ukraine rented out these rooms the night before and made holes like this in various locations to install cameras and to spy on the journalists. And by the way, Denis Bihus, who is in this video, we tried to bring him here to Perugia to be a speaker on the panel, but he couldn't because he has a very good reason. He is in active military service, he volunteered, and for the past 2 years, he's been actually deployed on the front line. And he couldn't get out of it to come talk to us, which is a respectable reason. Do you guys want to add something to this?
Well, the problem is that we still don't know from official bodies who ordered this crime against journalists. We still haven't heard any explanation officially. We just found out, Ukrainians found out what happened from suffered journalists and not from law enforcement. And that's, I think, the problem. And that originates from unfortunate practice of impunity for the crimes against journalists that is in place in Ukraine.
Yeah, it's important to add, we know the perpetrators, we know them because this team identified them. And what happens with the perpetrators, according to the leadership of this of the security service, they were fired or deployed to the front line, which is used as sort of a punishment now, unfortunately. But we don't know who ordered it, and we don't seriously believe that this is just this 30 guys who just woke up one day and decided that, you know, we're gonna spend the next few days like that. We're gonna go install cameras.
And I think that it's important to mention that this case also showed how law enforcement's connected between each other and the monopoly of decision-making in different law enforcements, because it will be not impossible to provide this case without involvement of national police, general prosecutor office, and other law enforcements, which means that, unfortunately, our law enforcement has kind of a coordinator and monopoly on decision-making.
But I'd like to add that I think the whole purpose of this operation was to ruin the reputation of journalists. Instead, it's now a big stain on the reputation of a Ukrainian security service.
There was a huge miscalculation behind it. It backfired hugely. But it didn't backfire against the person who ordered that, whoever that was, because we don't know who it was.
But it also was a good example of solidarity of journalists, I think, and solidarity of civil society, because civil society definitely supported journalists in this case. Nobody blamed journalists with kind of using drugs, etc. It was absolutely a fiasco for our security service, and there's a reputation of security service, which is actually doing a great job during the war, but not in this case.
I think the reaction of the public to it was very encouraging, actually, because as you mentioned, the point of publishing was that a couple of employees are taking drugs during the party. And I remember the hundreds of comments under the video and the news about it. And instead of, I mean, everybody was writing just, we don't care about the drugs, why the hell were there cameras? It's not okay that there were cameras there. Why the hell do we see this? And it was such a miscalculation because they thought that, that somebody's going to see them doing what they did at this party and just not trust them as journalists, but the opposite happened. And we talk about another important case. Oh yes, this is good. This is the QR code that leads to the full version of this investigation. The one that we showed the clip from was Dennis B, who's unscrewing the hanger appliance in the hotel room. This goes to the full version and has English subtitles, and it's just amazing work. It's 1 hour long, but you can, it's so entertaining. It's really good. And another case that is more recent. So after this thing with the security service, it was a huge scandal, and they, publicly and privately, they swore off putting any pressure on journalists ever again. They were, they made statements saying journalism was important. President Zelensky made a similar statement, and so it seemed like they would hold off for a while. Well, the while lasted about 2 months. This I actually don't remember when exactly this happened. It's a couple weeks ago.
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago. So, Natalie, I think you know the case well. Do you want to describe it?
Sure. So this case happened to our colleagues from investigative independent project called Slidstvo Info, and to its reporter named Yevhen Shulgat. So Yevhen questioned the origin of funds for an elite property of influential Ukrainian security service employee, namely the guy you see on the picture. He is head of the cybersecurity department of Security Service of Ukraine. Very important department, especially in times of war. But Yevhen questioned his assets and what is the origin of the funds for these assets. It's like an elite property in Kyiv. And actually that was the whole story. He found out this property, he came to the guy asking where the money coming from, he called his relatives, and that's it, classic investigation. But what happened is that on the eve of the publication, this reporter was approached in the supermarket by one of the subordinates of this head of the department, together with military recruitment office representatives. And they tried to hand him with draft notice. This is like a document that ordering a guy to join the military forces for combat. So it means that he was under surveillance by this subordinate of this influential person from Security Service of Ukraine for a purpose of intimidation and punishment for his professional duties and investigation into questionable assets of the influential guy. And likely reporters were able to obtain this video from CCTV cameras, and because, again, they are investigative reporters, they were able to identify who are these people.
And by this time, for a while, it's been like the elephant in the room. We've been talking privately that authorities may be using military draft enlistment as a tool to punish journalists, but you can't prove that. When somebody gets a draft notice, it could have happened randomly. So this is the first time when somebody was caught red-handed in such a blatant manner, because just to amplify this, the guy in the yellow square on the left, civilian clothes, he works for the guy in the picture, for the handsome dude who's former cybersecurity chief for SBU. And so this is the journalist that they're targeting, and it's so direct and obvious. This guy is giving instructions to the military people to give him the draft notice. And it was quite a shocking case. And what happened?
Well, the criminal case was opened for the interfering on journalistic activities. But at the same time, effectiveness of such criminal investigation is questionable because it is being conducted by the law enforcement that has less trust in society. And also the guy who is the head of cybersecurity department was punished, right? It was punished
by being sent to the front line.
They sent him to combat zone.
Which means that he doesn't take part in any criminal investigation because he's in the front line. So they definitely hide him in the front line. And actually, it happened before in the case with Bigus, the same situation. They also decided to hide them in the front line.
Yeah, and it means that he can come back in a year or two and have another job in that would allow him to do things like this. So he's not facing, actual justice. And yeah, we've talked about the forms of pressure that are experienced by Ukrainian journalists. This is a lot of it has been something that our newsrooms experienced, and we've covered that quite a bit. I want to rush us a bit because we need to. I would really love us to have time for just one question at the end. So after all the grim things we discussed, what's next for us? What is the situation? Where are we now? Are we is this the point where things are very bad and they're going to bounce back? Or, are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? What's going to happen now?
I can start. So I think journalism in Ukraine, like every single else sphere in the country, is absolutely influenced and dependent on what's going on and what's going to happen in war. So the most important thing is not to lose. Under occupation, nothing is worse than occupation. Under occupation, there is no freedom of speech. There are no independent press. Russia kills Ukrainian reporters. It jails them. In Crimea, our independent reporter has been in jail for 3 years, as well as dozens of other free voices in Crimea. But as for independent press, I believe that it is so powerful and motivated force. Hopefully you will be able to see this today with these examples, that despite challenges, we still continue to do what we understand is our mission. And I believe that this force will surely continue to point out the government what are their mistakes, not for a simple criticism, but for the sake of correcting them to increase the chances of victory. And I'm sure that there will be, again, those who do not like it. I'm afraid that many more red lines can be crossed again, as we see today's example. But I think that I'm sure that despite the war and these challenges, Ukrainian reporters have a high level of solidarity. We unite, we are vocal, we have what's the most important, I think, we have support among Ukrainian people. Ukrainians understand why it is so important to still have a freedom of press in country, even in times of such a horrible war. So I believe that Ukrainian society will uphold and protect freedom of speech, and this is our significant difference from Russia.
Right.
Yeah, I will add maybe a few seconds that, yeah, I'm speaking on behalf of Ukrainska Pravda, and actually our media already paid a significant price for being independent and for freedom of press. Two of our journalists were killed in 2000 and 2016. So me and my colleagues know what they are fighting. This is the first point. The second point, solidarity is very important among journalists and solidarity with civil society, and you're absolutely right that we have a vision that independent journalism is important, and independent journalism is very important because our country is fighting not only for the right to exist, but for the right to be democratic, European, and prosperous country. And without freedom of press, is impossible. The third one, it's important to support Ukrainian media. It's important to donate to Ukrainian media. We started our fundraise campaign because I think that in the future we will face with some challenges in terms of economic pressure. So please do support Ukrainian media. It's very important and valuable for us, and we will fight for our rights, and we will protect the truth. This is the most important.
It is indeed very important. There are many important things that you guys can do, people in this audience, to to support Ukrainian journalists who are going through things like what we described. It's important to that you help bring attention to these cases, because when you write about it, when you when you publicize it, it means that it becomes an issue in your countries and for your politicians, and it means that when they come to meet with people in Ukraine, they're gonna, in those rooms, they're gonna ask the question, what's happening with the journalists? Why are you doing that? So it increases the chance of that, that we're not alone in this, and that there is somebody watching from outside, and you can help this. I think we have time for one question. So if anybody wants to, I think people are feeling the pressure because I said one question, and it's like, either I don't see or there is none. That's actually, oh, there is one hand.
Hello, it will be just a short question. How do you deal with West-splaining Ukraine? I ask it as a Polish, because I also feel it like the West, maybe also including Italy, knows better what the Eastern Europe is.
How do we feel about the West's actions in Ukraine, you mean? In Ukraine. Well, I think none of the three of us are sure. What? Like mansplaining, but West-splaining. It's like mansplaining. Ah. Okay. You mean like in media? Do you mean in media? In Western media? I mean, I don't think this is something that we think about that much. When you talk about the West as the West, there are allies, there are bad actors, just like everywhere, and we all have our own relationship with Western media, and how we can have another panel on the Western media coverage of Ukraine, but it's a whole different topic. But we are all here, I think, till the well, not all of us till the end of the day, because I think Sivgil is leaving. But you can catch us and ask more about this, and I think we're perfect on time. Thank you. But yeah, can we have the final slides? Yes. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Attention everyone, for the one who will like it, you can remain inside the room for the next panel. So you can remain if you want. Attenzione a tutti, per coloro che vogliono rimanere all'interno della sala per vedere il prossimo panel possono farlo, quindi non c'è bisogno di uscire. Grazie.